It started with an orange slip of paper taped to an old fishing boat tied to the same dock. It had rested on for nearly 70 years. The paper barked out words like violation and fine in bold black ink. But what it didn't say was that the lake it floated on didn't belong to the HOA screaming for compliance. It belonged to the man they just threatened, a war veteran, a retired firefighter, a man who knew exactly how to fight when something worth protecting was on the line. What the HOA didn't know was that by trying to push him out, they had just declared war on the very honor of the water they were standing on. And what he uncovered next would shake the entire community to its core. I don't know if it was the screech of the rusty gate, or the way the wind carried the smell of pine through the air, but when Walt Briggs stepped onto the cracked front porch of his childhood home, something in him stirred that hadn't stirred in years. He was 68, retired, stiff in both knees, and carried a chest full of shrapnel memories from a war no one wanted to talk about anymore. But the call came from his sister. The cancer had returned, and she needed someone to take care of the place. So Walt packed what little he had from his tiny one-bedroom in Jacksonville and drove back to Hollow Ridge, a sleepy lake community wrapped in manicured lawns, cookie-cutter houses, and an HOA board more bloated with self-importance than an overfed tick. He didn't say much to the neighbors, didn't attend any welcome mixers, or fill out the residency forms they kept shoving under his door. He just puttered around the old house, fixed a fence, got the water running, and one morning on instinct, more than planned, dragged his granddaddy's old John boat from the shed and pushed it gently into the lake, just like he had 50 years ago when the only neighbors were trees. And the only rules were common sense. 2 days later, he found a neon orange paper taped to his boat like a ransom note. It barked out notice of violation in bold black letters and accused him of storing an unauthorized vessel on community property. It threatened $200 a day fines and even hinted at legal action if the boat wasn't removed by Friday. Now, Walt was no stranger to threats. He'd stared down bullets in Da Nang and flames in burning buildings. But there was something especially greasy about being threatened over a boat on a lake his family had fished in since 1910. He didn't yell, didn't call anyone. Instead, he walked slowly back to the house, pulled open the attic hatch, and spent 3 hours crawling through fiberglass insulation and dust until he found what he was looking for, an old tin box with a broken clasp stuffed with deeds, land, plats, and a brittle envelope with his grandfather's faded handwriting on the front. Inside was the original deed to the lake itself, signed, sealed, and notarized in 1948, proving that the entire 27-acre lake and 10 feet of shoreline in every direction still belonged to the Briggs family. Walt sat down hard on the attic floor, the paper trembling in his hand, and muttered, "Well, I'll be damned." The next morning, Walt shoved the deed into a plastic sleeve and pinned it to the front of the boat, right under the violation notice. He took a lawn chair down to the dock, set out a thermos of black coffee, and cast his line like nothing in the world was amiss. But trouble doesn't like to be ignored. And within an hour, 2 HOA board members showed up wearing matching golf shirts and mirrored sunglasses, demanding he remove the boat immediately. Walt didn't flinch. He poured himself another cup, pointed to the deed pinned to the boat, and said, "That paper's older than both of you put together. Read it, and then kindly get off my dock." One of them muttered something about checking with legal, and the other took pictures with his phone before they left in a huff. Walt didn't care. He knew the lake was his. What he didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that exposing that truth was about to kick over a hornet's nest of corruption, greed, and lies that had been festering just beneath the surface of that pretty, peaceful lake for decades. 2 nights later, Just as the sun was bleeding down over the water, Walt got a visit from Clara Jennings, the town's retired librarian and unofficial historian. She was in her 80s, drove a powder blue Buick, and had known Walt since he was knee-high. "I heard what they're doing," she said, handing him a brown envelope filled with yellowed newspaper clippings and copies of town council minutes from the 1950s. "Your grandfather didn't just own this lake. He fought like hell to keep it out of the developers' hands when they started building these houses. They tried to buy him out twice, even forged some paperwork back in '72, but he caught it in time." Walt sat stunned as Clara told him about the meetings, the threats, the lawsuits quietly settled. "They've been pretending this lake is community-owned for years. You're the first Briggs to come back and stir the pot." Walt looked out at the lake, his jaw tight. "Good," he said. "Maybe it's time it got stirred." But the pot didn't just stir, it boiled over. The following week, while Walt was out picking up groceries, the HOA hired a private towing company to remove the unsightly vessel. When Walt got home, his boat was gone, the dock was damaged, and a fresh notice was nailed to his shed stating that the boat had been confiscated due to non-compliance. That was the last straw. Walt drove straight to the sheriff's office, only to be told it was a civil matter. That's when he called Jenny Harper, a lawyer he'd once pulled from a burning building 30 years ago. She now ran a small firm out of a neighboring county and didn't take kindly to people messing with veterans, especially ones who saved her life. "Send me everything," she said. "We're going to war." Jenny filed an emergency injunction to halt any HOA activity near the lake until ownership could be verified in court. The judge granted it within 24 hours. Walt got his boat back 2 days later, dented and scratched but still floating. Word started spreading. Neighbors stopped him at the mailbox, asking quiet questions. Some were supportive, others sneered, but the tension kept building. Then Clara brought him something that blew the whole thing wide open: a copy of a recent planning commission submission submitted by the HOA president himself, outlining a proposal to build a luxury condo development and marina on the lakefront. The document falsely stated the HOA owned the lake and had secured unanimous community support. Walt felt his stomach twist. "They weren't trying to run off an old man," he whispered. "They were trying to steal the whole damn lake." Walt and Jenny decided to let the annual Lake Day Festival go ahead as scheduled. A garish affair hosted by the HOA with bounce houses, live music, and boat races, all held on what they falsely labeled community waterfront. Walt set up hidden trail cams, hired a private drone operator, and documented every inch of unauthorized use. He even invited a local news station under the guise of filming a feel-good community story. What they captured instead was footage of hundreds of people using private land without permission, with HOA members handing out passes and charging vendors for space. Walt watched from a folding chair behind a line of pine trees, his arms crossed. "They're digging their own grave," he said. "I'm just handing them the shovel." The lawsuit landed like a thunderclap. Walt sued the HOA for trespassing, damages, and fraud, backed by hard proof of ownership, forged documents, and evidence of illegal activity. The news ran with it. "Veteran exposes HOA scam," read one headline. Within a week, the HOA president resigned, 3 board members were served subpoenas, and the community was in uproar. At the next emergency meeting, residents shouted over each other, demanding answers about where their dues had gone and why no one knew the lake had been privately owned all along. One woman broke down in tears, saying her father had helped dig the drainage system and felt betrayed. Walt stood up quietly, waited for silence, and said, "I never minded folks fishing here. What I mind is being lied to. What I mind is theft dressed up as policy." It didn't take long for everything to fall apart. With the HOA in disarray and lawsuits piling up, residents voted to dissolve the old board entirely. A new leadership team was elected, this time led by retired Judge Martha Combs, who had no tolerance for shady dealings or veiled threats. Walt worked with her to set up a lake preservation charter, a nonprofit that would allow residents respectful, limited access to the lake with annual permits. Funds would go toward shoreline restoration, habitat protection, and community fishing days, just like Walt's grandfather used to host. It's not about kicking people out, Walt told her. It's about reminding folks what it means to take care of something that doesn't belong to the highest bidder. By fall, the lake had never looked better. The water was clearer, the trash gone, the loud parties replaced by quiet afternoons, and the occasional guitar by the fire pit. The trail cams were still up now, more as a reminder than a defense. The children who once swam under false ownership now came with their parents and asked Walt's permission before skipping stones, and he gave it gladly, as long as they respected the rules and remembered the lake wasn't theirs to ruin. One afternoon, as the leaves turned gold and the air bit with autumn chill, Walt took his repaired john boat out onto the lake. As he cast his line, he looked toward the rebuilt dock where a plaque now hung. It read, "In honor of Harlan Briggs, who believed water is a gift, not a commodity. Some battles aren't won with fists or fire, they're won with patience, paperwork, and the unwavering belief that right is right."